Uh, I'm Susan Pruden with Century 21 New Millennium. I've been selling real estate here in Cheverly for 30 years next week. I'm kind of excited about that. But more importantly, Joseph and I are Cheverly residents and homeowners who just got their property tax assessment. Now, I live, eat, and breathe Cheverly property values, so mine went up 26%, but I wasn't particularly surprised by that. That's pretty in line with where values have gone. And because I think that ours is pretty fair, I won't be appealing our assessment. Never done that before, so I'm going to rely on some people who have done it. But before I go further, I want to give some thank yous. First, I want to thank the town of Cheverly for agreeing to co-host this with me. Because of their agreement to partner on this, it's giving us further reach. It's being recorded, and my understanding is that it's going out live, which is a little scary. I also want to thank Councilwoman Jolene Ivy and her staff, many of whom also just got their Cheverly property tax assessments. And they arranged for a representative from SDAT to join us at our live workshop, which will be January 23rd, and will be in person at the community center. I also want to thank Robin Kay. She's a longtime Cheverly resident and someone who has successfully been through the appeal process. She's a panelist on here, so she can jump in and correct me if I say something that seems to be really wrong. And since, as I said, I've never been through the appeals process, there's nothing like actual experience to help guide us. I want to thank the State Department of Assessments and Taxation for providing someone to come to our next workshop and answer questions. If there are questions that we can't answer today, I'm sure there will be some since none of us are SDAT employees. We will save them for the next workshop. I want to thank the Cheverly Boys and Girls Club. Thanks, Larry, for rearranging their schedule so that we can use the gym on the 23rd. I want to thank my husband, Joseph, who is monitoring the chat to see if there are any questions that I need to be aware of. And I'm going to do just a little bit of house cleaning, and that is to say, please use the chat for your questions so that we can keep a record of them. There will be questions, as I said, that neither I nor the town can answer because we are not State Department of Assessments and Taxation's employees. So let's jump in here. As you can see from this Baltimore Sun article from a week or so ago, property assessments across the state jumped more than 23%. And it seems to me that within Cheverly, we've jumped about 25 to 30%. That's from what I've been hearing sort of anecdotally. But we can be really glad that we are not in Worcester, Garrett, Cecil, or even more importantly, Somerset County, where their property assessments went up more than 51%. And we all know why they did that. That's at the pandemic, right? People discovered that they didn't have to live near their work, and those counties saw huge increase in sales and in property values. I want to talk about Prince George's County. We're going to narrow it down to Cheverly in a moment. Prince George's County, this is the average sales price for detached homes. I selected just detached since that's what is primarily for sale in Cheverly, or the houses in Cheverly. Our previous assessment, the 2021 assessment, was based on sales from 2020. So you can see where they were. The assessment that we just got in the mail, the 2024 assessment, is based on sales from 2023. So you can see right there why our assessments jumped so much, and that's because our property values jumped a whole lot. In Cheverly, the last year for which we had an assessed that our 2021 assessment was based on, our average sales price was about $430,000. In 2021, we had a huge year with 101 sales is a lot for this town. And our average sales price jumped to over $483,000. In 2022, we had fewer sales, but our sales price average jumped to 513,000. And thank goodness that's not the year that our assessments are based on, because last year we only had 60 sales and our average sales price did drop to about $487,000. I want to start off by pointing out a couple of really important dates. The most important one is that we have a hard deadline of February 12th to appeal your assessment. You can file it online or you can mail it. If you file it online, you have to do it by the 12th. If you mail it, it has to be postmarked by the 12th. The next date, April 15th, I'm going to cover a little bit later, but I do want to point out the last one, July 1st. The piece of mail that we just got showing us our property value for the purposes of tax is just that. It's just telling you the value. We won't know how that translates into an actual bill, an actual dollar amount for how much our tax bill is until July 1st. The county usually sends it out somewhere in the month of July. And I want to talk a little bit about the actual appeal process. My understanding is that the initial review, which is the supervisor's level, lasts about 15 minutes. It's a pretty short meeting and it's fairly informal. I do want to point out something as before I go much further in this is back in 2018, our former mayor, Mike Callahan, had the idea of doing this every 3 years. I thank him for that. And he had someone from SDAT who came and talked to us, a guy named Dan Puma, who's since retired, but he wanted to make it very clear. This is not an adversarial process. SDAT wants to get it right, and they're not trying to get money from you by hook or by crook. And most of the people I have talked to have backed this up. That is, actually, the people are very friendly, very helpful. That's been my experience in talking to them through this process. You have the option of asking for a written hearing, a phone meeting, a virtual meeting, or an in-person meeting. What I've heard from people is do any of them but the written hearing, that because you don't have the opportunity to answer questions or perhaps make a point that you forgot to make in writing. The next level, if you're not satisfied with the results of the first step, you can appeal to the Property Tax Assessment Appeal Board. And if you are still not happy with the result, you have your last resort is to appeal to the Maryland Tax Court. From the bit that I have read, it looks like the further up you go, the further into the process you go, the more documentation you have to provide. But I would say that regardless of what you do, if you think your assessment is too high, go ahead and submit an appeal, because what you're going to get, one of the things you can do is you can always cancel it. You can say, you know what, I'm looking at the data and now I don't think maybe I shouldn't appeal it. And you can just cancel it. But the important part is you might want to get the worksheet. And the worksheet's going to give you information like it's going to give you the information that the State Department of Assessments and Taxation has on your property. And they may have the wrong square footage. They may, like one person said, they may have on there that you have a deck or an addition that you never had. It may have the wrong number of bedrooms and bathrooms. And there may be problems with your property that they're not aware of, like a failing roof or a leaky basement. My biggest advice to you is don't get in the weeds. You know, when you're selling or buying a property and you have an appraisal, they compare your property line by line. Oh, it's got a slightly better kitchen than the subject property. We have 3 bedrooms rather than 4 bedrooms and so forth. That's not what your property tax assessment does. The Department of Assessments is looking at averages for similar homes. They are not doing a line-by-line comparison of your house with those houses. So the first step is request your property worksheet. on my website, the cheverlygoodlife.com, there are 4 blog posts. One of them, I think it's the third one, has a link to the property worksheet so you can request it. That worksheet, as I said, shows all the details of your property as known by SDAT and a sales list of properties that were used in your valuation. And you might say, well, why is it important to look at that? Back in 2018, when we did our first workshop, there was somebody who came that said that their property had been assessed at 600 and some $1,000s. Well, at that point, a $400,000 sale was like mind blowing in town. And we couldn't figure out where they came up with that value. So he requested his worksheet and found out that through some weird glitch, they had been comparing his property with properties in Riverdale Park. Dan Puma, as I said, was there, and he perked up and said, whoa, let me get your information because that's not right and that shouldn't happen. And they took care of it. I don't know what the ultimate outcome of it was, but they really do want to get it right. So let me tell you a little bit about what doesn't work. If you're arguing your assessment, don't talk about the percentage of increase. As you saw from that chart for Prince George's County, they don't care. They're not comparing it to what the assessment was in the past. So talking about your past assessment isn't going to work. Don't bring up the values of properties in other areas because they don't have any impact on our immediate area. So what does work? Correcting square footage. Square footage is huge, or the number of bedrooms and bathrooms. You might say, you know what, you use this property as a comparable property, but I think this other property is a better comparable property. You can point out issues that SDAT's not aware of, like a failing roof or foundation issues. So again, unlike selling your house, a 2-year-old roof and a 10-year-old roof, as long as they aren't failing, it's the same. A roof is a roof is a roof. Same thing, you might say, well, my kitchen's 10 years old and that comparable that you used is a 2-year-old kitchen. SDAT doesn't care. A kitchen is a kitchen. And a finished basement is considered finished if it has a floor, walls, and a ceiling, floor covering, not the concrete. It's the same value for their purposes if you have the latest and the greatest, or if you have asbestos tile and knotty pine walls. So if you add a bathroom or something like that, then that may add value. Another thing to consider, if you have a 5-bedroom home and 3 of your bedrooms are above grade and 2 are in the basement, they're going to probably look at your house and say, well, it's a 3-bedroom house with 2 rooms in the basement. So that's just something to keep in mind. And if you're looking at the tax records, as I said, you're going to compare above grade square footage on your house with above grade square footage on someone else's house. What is above grade? Here's grade, that's the ground. Here's your house above the ground, that's above grade. So don't get caught up with comparing the size of your basement, with the size of another property with the basement. You're going to narrow it down to similar styles. For instance, a colonial that's 3 basement and 2 levels above grade is not the same as a rambler. It's usually a basement with 1 level above grade. They don't usually compare the 2 of those. They're not similar. But Cape Cods are pretty flexible because they tend to be 3 levels, but they also tend to have bedrooms on the main level. So sometimes you can compare a Cape Cod with your rambler or with your colonial. Look for the most recent sales. More recent sales are given more weight. You're going to, again, as I mentioned earlier, you're going to look for substantially the same level of updatedness. If you have a house that was just renovated, then they're going to compare it with other houses that have been just renovated. I'm going to get into a little more detail on that in just a moment. If you have a recent appraisal that shows a lower value, then that's given a lot of weight. Perhaps you have just purchased, or perhaps you have just refinanced and you have an appraisal. And that appraisal is going to give you a wealth of information like square footage and above grade and below grade square footage, above grade and below grade bathrooms and bedrooms and so forth. And that information is very useful in doing your appeal. I've said this multiple times, but that's because they've said it to me multiple times. Note substantial in condition issues like a failing roof, failing windows, or foundation issues. We've just had a lot of rain, and those of us, that would include us, that had a little bit of water in our basement, that's something that SDAT might want to be aware of. So, as I said, on my website, thecheverlygoodlife.com, I have a 4-part series on how to appeal your assessment. The first part just pretty much summarizes what I'm saying now. The second part is an example from someone who went through the process. I think it was 2018, might have been the next one, that said that they went through and they had a long talk with the people at SDAT, found them very, very helpful. And what she did was she sent me an email saying, here's what I learned, and other people may find it useful. That's in part 2. Part 3, I talk a lot about property tax credits. And I believe in part 3, I have a sample of a letter. And then in part 4, I have a lot of data. I'll cover that in just a moment. So this is a sample letter. Okay, it's in part 4. This is a sample letter from somebody who did successfully appeal their property value some years back. It's a 2-page letter. The whole thing's on the website. You can download it and modify it to help for your own use. I have done a spreadsheet. It's an Excel spreadsheet with all multiple listing service sales from 2023. It excludes distressed sales like foreclosures. I went through each property and I rated each property by the level of updatedness that I thought each one manifested. So a property that's rated a 4 has been renovated relatively close to going on the market. So it's probably within the last 18 months. A level 3 house, it's a sort of a sliding scale, but in my opinion, it was more updated than not. So for instance, perhaps you have a house that the bathrooms and kitchens have been updated, but it has an older roof and older windows, and maybe the basement hasn't been updated. These 3s will also include homes that were renovated or flipped previously, but not recently. 2 are properties that are not updated. Again, that's sort of a sliding scale. These homes are more on the not updated side than updated. So there may be updated elements. I actually tend to think of these like how most of us live in our homes. Maybe you updated your kitchen back in the 90s, but when the refrigerator breaks, you go out and buy a new refrigerator. You don't say, oh, my refrigerator's broken, I think I'll completely renovate the kitchen. And so it's more piecemeal than perhaps something that's rated a 3. This is what the spreadsheet looks like. You can see that there are these little arrows here. That is, and you can sort. You can change it, say, okay, well, I want to sort this by price, or I want to sort it by square footage. That's actually further over on the spreadsheet. Or you might want to sort it by condition. You may actually find it useful to do 2 or 3 different sorts just to narrow it down to the properties that are most similar to yours. Actually, I'm going to go back to that for a moment. I do want to make it very clear that the condition ratings are absolutely just my opinion. They are not written in stone. SDAT may not agree with them. You may not agree with them. It's a starting place. So one of the things you can do is offset your property tax increases with property tax credits. Maryland has several. One is the homeowner's tax credit. I'm going to do a little reading here. The homeowner's tax credit says if your gross household income is $60,000 or less, you may qualify for the homeowner's tax credit. And on your property tax assessment, there is a place on there that tells you where to go to apply for it. I believe you have to apply for that annually. The next one is the homestead tax credit. I'm going to spend a moment talking about that because that's the really big one that impacts those of us who live in the home and own it. The homestead tax credit, the sole criteria is you've been in the house more than a year and you live in the house and you own it. That's it. You apply once, and once you've applied, you don't have to go back and apply for it again. But what the homestead tax credit does, it doesn't change your property tax assessment. It caps your payment. So we won't know the effect of the homestead tax credit on our assessment until July. But here's what it does. Your property tax bill is divided into, there's the state property taxes, there's county property taxes, and municipal property taxes, so Cheverly. It caps your payment at 10% of the state property tax, 4% of the county property tax, and 10% of the Cheverly property tax. Like I said, they work all those numbers out, and you'll see that in July. Here's one of the reasons that it matters and why a lot of people don't worry about contesting their assessment. The homestead tax credit, it may be that you get your assessment down, but it doesn't change your payment because you've already been capped by the homestead tax credit. So if you have not applied for it and you own the home you live in, please do apply for it. I can help you find that information out. I think most of you have been asking me that question, and I've helped quite a few people find out whether they currently have the homestead tax credit or not. I'm going to cover the next three all together. If you're a 100% disabled veteran or the surviving spouse of a 100% disabled veteran, excuse me, if you are a disabled veteran currently on active duty or the surviving spouse of active duty military personnel who died in the line of duty, the state of Maryland says, thank you so much for your service. You don't have to pay any property taxes at all, but you do have to apply for it. And the last one that I have from the state of Maryland is if you are a blind person or the surviving spouse of a blind person, then you get, you're exempt from $15,000 of the property's assessed value. And again, you have to apply for it. Prince George's County has property tax credits as well. And hold on, I need to scroll up. So I have an important note here. The first one is the senior tax credit. This is a brand new tax credit. It didn't go into effect until last July. And it, you have to be, sorry, change my notes around. You have to be 65 or older, own and reside at the property for which the credit is sought for at least 10 years, and the assessed value can't exceed $500,000 at the time of application. A lot of people have reached out to me because the senior tax credit includes it's a 20% tax credit, but it includes the homestead tax credit and the homeowner's tax credit. So if the combination of all of those exceeds 20%, you may not get it. So someone asked about it on the exchange this morning, and Jolene Ivy responded back. She said, we're in the process of considering a bill to amend this tax credit. Currently, if you already receive the homestead tax credit, you may not be able to benefit from this one too. Right now, it's estimated that the cost to the county to change this would be about $10 million, and we're facing a significant budget deficit. So we have to figure out how to make it work. But for those of you who reached out to me about the senior tax credit, take heart. Apparently, the county council's working on it. The next tax credit is if you have just put in within the past 12 months accessibility features. There's a list on their website that says what those features are that qualify for the tax credit. If you put in a ramp 10 years ago, you can't, that doesn't apply. You're applying for a tax credit for work that was done recently. The credit allowed under this is the lesser of 50% of the eligible costs, or $2,500. I'm going to skip the agricultural land because I don't really think it applies to us. They have one that's alternative energy. That's a tax credit for solar energy or geothermal, but you have to show proof and you have to apply for it. Surviving spouse of a fallen officer, that's another one. I don't know how many people in town that may apply to, but it's there. This applies to very few people in town, but for those of you who own an historic property, you can get a credit towards expenses incurred for restoration and preservation of any structure that's on our approved historic sites and district plan. Full disclosure, I am a commissioner on the county's Historic Preservation Commission, and those do come before me. So I might have to recuse myself if you're applying for that. And then I'm going to skip the conservation land and landfill credit. There is one other credit that's a pretty big one, and that is there's an IRS credit. I don't have it on my slides, but it is on my website, sorry. And that is there is an IRS tax credit that's available for energy efficiency. And there's a whole lot in there that goes to explain that. So go back to those important dates and back to the April 15th date. So if you are applying for that income base, that gross household income up to $60,000, if you're applying for that, they ask that you should apply for it by April 15th so that it can show up on your bill in July. I suspect that's true for a bunch of those tax credits, so that April 15th deadline might be pretty important to keep in mind. And then the last thing to go over before I open it up for questions is what happens if you miss the appeal deadline? You have a couple of options. One, and they don't really advertise this very much. You kind of have to dig for it. You can file a petition for review anytime up to January 1st. And once you do, there will be on any given year, and you can then they'll schedule the hearing for for after the following January 1st. Why would you do that? So one, you may have just missed the appeal deadline of February 12th. But the other is if something happens that affects the value of your property. So maybe you've had a property that's been in great shape, but suddenly you have a flooded basement. That might affect the value of your property. A fire, something like that. Or something else that could happen is property values could drop. So that's excuse me, that's an important, sorry. That's an important thing to keep in mind as you monitor the value of your property. And the other is if you have purchased a property between January 1st and June 30th, and you feel that the property tax value is the assessed value is too high, you have, I think, a 90-day, I think it's 90, to appeal that. If you're purchase a property past June 30th, then you're just going to be part of the regular appeal process. Nope, sorry, there's my notes. You have to file the appeal within 60 days of the transfer. And I think with that, we're going to open it up for questions. Wanda Greeley is our SSTAT person who is not here today, but she will be at the next one. And I believe Robin, you're on here. Um, and then do we have any questions? Tammy, I see you have a question? I don't think I think I need you to, can you type it into the Q&A or into the chat? Because we're really trying to keep track of the questions in writing so that we can bring them up at the next meeting as well. Okay. Okay, somebody said, Josh, you said, Josh and I, we are wondering if the assessment ever comes back higher after an appeal. Thanks, Nicole. Okay, so from what I understand, there is the possibility that they could come back and say your assessment is you are actually underassessed and they would increase your assessment. My understanding is that it will not affect your tax bill now, but in the next cycle, they will make those corrections. So yeah, if people have come back and said, oh my goodness, I appealed my assessment and they said that it was under assessed. Can you appeal investment houses in Cheverly? Absolutely. The only thing that's really different about you can, any property you own, you can appeal the assessment for your property. The difference is that if you own the house, then you qualify for the homestead tax credit. If you are, if it's an investment property, sorry, you have to pay the full amount. Denise Ryan, you said, can you speak to the addition of solar panels and how it affects home value? Is it considered an accessory structure? Denise, I'm going to hold that question for for the January 23rd one. I know kind of how it affects home values for resale, but not how it affects it for the assessment purposes. I think that's a question for them. Stacy said, if you appeal your assessment and they figure out during the appeal it's actually worth more, could they increase the assessment? Absolutely. They just said it, they say it won't affect your assessment this cycle. It will affect the next cycle. We're going to ask that question again to make sure that ESTAT has the same answer I do, but that's my understanding from a close read of their website. Any data showing if appealing affects future resale value? No, it doesn't. So here's the thing with resale value and property tax assessments. There's a little tiny window where it go back here, where the property tax assessment and your resale value are close. And that's probably right now. But the further we get away, I mean, this is it's only assessed once every 3 years. So the further we get away from the actual assessment, the more likely the assessment and your actual property value for resale purposes are going to be very different. So they really don't have any correlation. Kay, you asked, why do we have such a deficit suddenly? That's a question for, I would maybe go back and that's statewide. The state has a huge deficit. The county has a huge deficit. My understanding is that's all about the pandemic, but that I would ask that question of our state and county representatives. Is there any way I can look up on the state website if I have the homestead tax credit? I have the link to that is on my website. I forget which thing it's in, if it's in posts 1, 2, 3, or 4, but the link is there. And if you have any problems with it, just send me an email. The My email is my name, Susan@susanpruden.com. So it's really easy to look up. And I think I've sent it out on the exchange a few times as well. I'll send it out again today. Are the assessment, excuse me, are the assessments intended to be fair market value? That's the intention. But they're not calculated the same way that we do for resale. Tammy said, if I disclose that I have a leaky roof or water in the basement, does that hurt me when and if I sell? Only if you still have a leaky roof or a wet basement. There's, again, nobody's going to go back and look at your assessment to determine anything about your property value. I don't believe that information is public, but it could be. I don't know. Can you mention the requested worksheet again? So there is a worksheet that you apply for. There's a link to it on my website. That when you do that, you get back the information that SDAT has on your property, square footage, bedrooms, bathrooms, and so forth. And the properties that they used in coming up with your value. So even if you don't appeal, you may request that worksheet and you may find it useful to have. What happens after the appeal is approved? Does the homeowner take any action? I'm going to hold that question. I don't believe you need to take any action because at this point, what it would do would be it would go through their system and then it would be reflected in your tax bill. But that's a question that I would actually ask SDAT at the January 23rd meeting. Is there a deadline for filing for the homestead tax credit? No. Sooner the better. Get that thing done so that you start qualifying for it sooner rather than later. Is the tax based on acreage of lot or square footage of the property? If you have a small house on a large lot, does that make any difference? It might make a tiny difference, Janet. They are actually looking at the value of the house, not the value of the land. There is some value given to the land, but it's quite a bit different than the value that they give to the house. If you look at your let me see. Let me pull up my assessment here. It's the value, the land value of your property is, so apparently in mine, I got no preference for where my property is because it's not near water. There's a few other conditions. So yeah, land factors into it, but not a whole lot. So Kay, I know you had told me about this earlier, that you applied for the senior tax credit and you were denied. So you said, nowhere was I told that I would be denied due to my homestead tax credit. Why bother to announce Prince George's County has it? I think that's what the county has discovered, is that a lot of people aren't qualifying for it because of the homestead tax credit. It does say right on the information that was put out last year that the senior tax credit is inclusive of the homestead tax credit and the homeowner's tax credit. So my understanding is that if your homestead tax credit is already above that 20%, then you may not get the homeowner's tax credit. I think that's going to be something to take up with the county council. And yes, I see you said glad Jolene is working on it. Me too. How can you access this recording later? Delane, can you answer that? Are you there? Well, it'll be on the town website, and I'll have a link to it as well on my website. And yes, you'll be able to see the recording. And then my understanding is the the next one will be recorded as well. If the assessment is made on site, is it an exterior or whole house inside and out inspection? My understanding is that they are not doing in-person inspections. That's a question that we'll have to ask at the next one, because truly my understanding is that almost everything's being done by algorithm now. I talked a little about the difference between above grade and below grade square footage. Are they assessed the same? I believe they are given, they are weighted differently in terms of giving the value. How to get the property worksheet. There's a link in on my website. I'll send it out on the exchange as well. I don't have the link on me at the moment. 4 totals on the assessment: base value, value as of date, and 2 phase-in assessment totals. Okay, so that's actually a good thing to talk about for a moment. Thanks for bringing that up. The base value is, I'm sorry, I'm gonna pull this up a little bit. The base value is the actual value of the property. The value as of date has to do with when the phase-in values. So when they figure out your value, they don't jump everything in the first year. So if you've gone up 26%, what they do is they phase the increases in over those 3 years. So on the 3rd year, you will then be paying on the full assessment value, but they phase it in so that nobody gets payment shock. I would focus on the base value, or the value, the value of the actual assessed value. I hope that answers your question. If they deny your appeal, is there any recourse? Yes, as I said, you can, there are 3 stages altogether. One is the more simple one. The next one is to an appeal board, and the third is to the Maryland Tax Court. And there is a lot of information on the SDAT website, and that tells you how those work. It says you worry that they can just deny all appeals and be done with it. So as I said at the very beginning, and I know, David, you said you came in late, SDAT really wants to get it right. This is not adversarial. They're not trying to just get all your money. They really do want to get it right. And my experience is that they are very helpful and friendly and easy to work with. Whether or not that results in your appeal being successful, I don't know, but they're not trying to just deny all the appeals and be done with it. I know a lot of people who have appealed successfully. What areas are they looking in for their comparables? Is it only Cheverly properties? Probably pretty close to being only Cheverly properties. And the reason for that is most of the property values in areas around us are not comparable. So probably looking at just Cheverly. They try not to go very far afield. Is there any way to calculate a rough estimate of what the tax will be before January? I have no idea. Seriously, I just don't know, because I don't know what the tax credit's going to be. There are just an awful lot of factors to look at. That's probably something we can ask at the next meeting. Hi, Norm. You said this isn't an assessment question. Oh, so yeah, this is a good question. It's if SSTAT's website allows me to get their real property search result with the assessment data, why can't I also access the actual assessment notice online? And I asked that question a week or so ago and kind of got a answer. I've never been able to see the actual assessment notice online, but um, there's there's a lot of good information on it. And I will say that one of the things that happened recently that I really applaud for SSTAT is they changed the format of the notice of assessment, and I find it much more informative than the old one. But yeah, I wish I knew why you couldn't get it online, but apparently you can't. Is the total property value the same as the total market value? The assessment value they sent me doesn't match. Oh, I don't know. It says the assessment value they sent me doesn't match the total property value from the spreadsheet they sent me when I requested additional information. I have no idea. I will ask that question at the next one. Kay says, do they count one toilet in the basement as a bathroom? They say I have 3 bathrooms, but that's not true. So I don't know the answer to that question. So having grown up in a house that had a big unfinished basement with a toilet sitting in the middle of it, that's not an unusual circumstance in some of these older homes. I don't know the answer to that question. We'll hold that for January 23rd. How will the new hospital project affect our assessments? This assessment, I don't think it'll affect it at all. I have no idea about the future. I just found the property worksheet. It says we need to have an appeal active to get the info. Is that true? I believe so. That's why I said you may want to go ahead and file for an appeal just to get the property worksheet. And you can always cancel it and say you don't want to go any further. I'm sure they have that happen quite a bit. Of those who appealed, what percentage were successful in Cheverly and what was the actual number of appeals? Oh goodness, I have no idea. I doubt that the representative from SSTAT will know. For a matter of curiosity, I guess that's an interesting question, but I don't know the answer to it. I think, nope. So here's somebody said the value as of 2024 is 100,000 more than the phase-in assessment. As of July 1, 2024, why is the value in the future less than the current? Yeah, that's because they phase it in. So if I'm just going to use round numbers. If your assessment is $500,000, your first phase in is going to be probably it's going to go up by only a third from the previous assessment. And then in the second year, it'll go up again. And then in the third year, it will equal the full amount of your actual assessment, and your phase-in assessment will match. And as I said, that's so that nobody gets hit with a 26% increase in the first year. And so far, I think I've hit the end of my questions. Robin, I know you're muted at the moment, but if you would unmute, do you have anything to add about your experience and going through this process?
Hi. Sure.
Hey,
I can
Robin.
add a little summary of my past experiences. So first of all, thank you, Susan, for holding this workshop again. This is tremendously helpful. I probably never would have appealed my assessments if it weren't for these workshops that you started holding. Back in 2015, I had a property. Well, I have a few properties in Cheverly, and in 2015, I got the assessments back then and thought they were high, but I was too intimidated to figure out the appeals process or to go forward with it. And so I didn't. And in 2018, Susan held the workshop with the SSTAT representative. which made me feel a million times more comfortable with the notion that it's not an adversarial process, and it actually is not a high level of effort at all. It's a very low level effort, mostly thanks to Susan providing the data on her site, the spreadsheet of comps of past sales in Cheverly. Given that spreadsheet, it's pretty easy to kind of get your data together to make your case, and it doesn't take much time to do it. After that meeting in 2018, I went ahead and parsed through the data to find applicable comps, and I went ahead and filed for an appeal, which I chose at the time over the phone, to have a phone one, because they didn't have virtual ones then, way back in 2015 or 2018. The woman I spoke to was very pleasant. I made my case. I just kind of walked through the comps. She asked me some questions. And I did end up emailing her kind of my write-up of what I had gathered based on the data. And I was successful in my appeal. Your measure of success might be different. My measure of success was that most of the increase was reduced. So it still increased a little bit, but not nearly as much as they were going to increase it. One of my big questions back in 2018, which maybe some of you are considering, is, as I said, the previous assessments I already felt were high, but I didn't take action then. So does that count against me? And now I want to appeal the assessment, but I didn't do it before. Would that count against my argument? And the answer is no. The SDAT representative at that time said, no, it's just taken as the comps in the current state of affairs, and what you did in the past makes no difference. So that to me was also another big motivator and going ahead and trying it. When you file that appeal, you do get their data first. You, like Susan mentioned, you get their worksheet of how they came up with your value. And that's also very helpful for if you want to refute any of the comps that they chose. Sometimes in my case, it was they chose properties that were not in Cheverly, and that's pretty easy one to argue. And otherwise, you can kind of argue, for me, in my case, was mostly the level of updatedness of a house. In my case, the one I'm appealing, and I'm going to appeal again this year, is an investment property in Cheverly, where the updatedness of that house is not the same as some of the comps that they're choosing. And when you go through Susan's spreadsheet where she's showing you all the comps from the past year, I'd say it's helpful to do both ends of the spectrum. One is find comps that are similar to your home to come up with the value that you think is correct. And also look for comps that have a value close to what the tax assessment says, so that you can argue my home is nowhere near as updated as these homes, that you say my home is worth this much. But I would argue that my home that has original Cheverly bathrooms that is from like 1949 is not worth the same as these homes that you're claiming it's worth the same as that. So I think it's good to have both sets of comps to refute that. But basically, yeah.
Really
So
good point.
yeah, one more bit. I did appeal again in 2021. It was like a huge increase again, and I would say I was successful again, where they wanted to raise it a big chunk, and then I got it reduced down to a smaller increase. So I deem that as a success, and that's where my journey ends. Both times I have appealed where I was satisfied with the new number. So I have not actually taken it further, and if anyone else has that experience of appealing further down the line, that would be valuable to know. But I don't have that experience. I have felt satisfied with the results of my appeals process both times. So yeah, it's worth doing, just because it doesn't take that much time. It really doesn't take much time and effort, and you'll have a little bit of time to go through the worksheet. When your appeal comes up, it's 15-20 minutes on the phone or virtual. and then, maybe you get a decrease, maybe not, but it's worth a shot.
Thank you. I really do want to highlight what you said about not only looking at properties that you think are comparable to your property, but looking at the higher end, the properties that they think are comparable, go back and look them up as well, because you may look at one of those properties and find that was flipped 6 months ago. And so that's really big. I don't know anyone that's gone beyond that first level either. So as I said, I think as you go up the levels, at least from what I've read on the website, um, there's a lot more documentation you go, the higher up you go in the appeal process. And I don't know what the details are in that. So um thanks a lot, Robin. That's very helpful. And particularly everyone that I've talked to that has said that they have gone through this initial process like you did, and did it either over the phone or in person, probably also virtual in 2021, said the same thing you did. The people that you talked to are very helpful and friendly, and they want to get it right. They're really not trying to just deny you and get all the money. So, I don't see any other questions coming across. Um, I don't know, Delane, are you still on there? I was going to say, do you know when this will when it'll be able to go up? I think this may not go up on the website until Tuesday, and that's because this is a Saturday and the offices are closed. I thank the town again for doing this on a Saturday, but Monday's a holiday, so that may not go live until Tuesday. Is that correct, Elaine?
That's possible. However, I have been in touch with our provider to let them know to post this right away. So you could see this as early as 30 minutes after the meeting, depending on what their production list is.
Y'all are the best.
Thank you.
So I don't see any other questions coming across. I give it a couple of moments and then I will say that's a wrap. I appreciate everybody who logged in. Looks like we've got 44 participants. I suspect that as word gets out, we may have more at the in-person workshop. And I'm sorry, Delane, I know you just jumped back off, but you said we'll be able to print. Actually, let me look at this. I want to print off the questions. Nope, I can't do it, so I'm hoping you can. So I want to, keep a copy of the questions so that we've got them to ask at the next workshop. The next workshop will be January 23rd. That's a Tuesday at 7 p.m. That will be at the community center. And thanks again to the Cheverly Boys and Girls Club for making it available to us. And I think that that's it.